Welcome to Talking Meds on the Presqipp podcast, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. I'm your host, Jonathan Underhill. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Talking Meds. I'm delighted to be joined today by Professor Neal Maskrey. Neal and I worked together for about 25 years at the National Prescribing Centre and then at NICE, and he'll be familiar to lots of you. As well as us two old blokes catching up and reminiscing about the good old days, if you think Bob Mortimer and Paul Whitehouse, but without the fishing and frankly without the comedy. He's only gone and followed through with what he said to me for years that he was going to do, and he's written his memoirs. Yes, his book, Rebalancing Medicine, is published and available in all good bookstores, as an actual book, but also as a Kindle download as well. So we're going to talk about that, as well as gather some of his wisdom and thoughts about where he sees the future of medicines and healthcare going. So for those of you who don't know Neal, he was a GP in Yorkshire for about 20 years and continues to work extensively supporting postgraduate training with GP trainers and their registrars. And I'm actually helping him with some of that as well, which is very exciting. He then worked for North Yorkshire Health Authority developing primary care and was an early editor of clinical evidence at the BMJ. He then spent a delightful 14 years working with me when he was director of the National Prescribing Centre and then programme director at the Medicines and Prescribing Centre at NICE. He still has a chair as a visiting professor of evidence-informed decision-making at Keele, where the two of us still collaborate on various innovative stuff on shared decision-making, including avatars, which allow people to practice and hone their consultation skills, getting feedback in a safe space where you don't upset the person because computers don't have feelings. Well, at least they don't yet. Maybe Mr. Musk will have something to do about that, but let's not go there, shall we not? So, Neal, welcome. Did I miss anything?
Well, I'm going to disagree with you straight away, Jonathan. I don't think the book's a memoir. I spent about 10 years writing this book, and what's now out there is the fifth or sixth version. So the first two versions were based on cases. A great local GP, Simon Tobin, sent me some case materials, and we were trying to do it in the context of cases, and really that didn't work because the scope was too narrow, and it didn't have the context of how we've ended up in this situation with medicine. It didn't go back far enough in history. So then I got rid of the cases, and it became a textbook. And honestly, even I wouldn't have read the textbook. It was so dull and boring. So then I went down the route of what do human beings like? Human beings like stories. We all, when we get together socially, we all like to talk about the stories. So then I went down that, okay, we'll put some of the stories in, and inevitably that's some of my stories and the stories of other people. But so in a way it's a memoir, but really it's broader than that.
Okay, I mean, I love memoirs. My favourite books that I've ever read have been autobiographies and I think I've said before that it gives you a real insight into the person that you're interested in. Yeah. And the thing that came across to me in this book was, yes, there were some stories, personal stories that I recognised, but it was the context of the other things that you put it into and wrote it very, very well. Sort of the past, the history. You have to know where you're coming from, don't you, in order to know where you're going to. And I think you do that very well. As you say, with those stories in between that really make it jump off the page and make it really quite powerful.
Well, I think that was one of the tricks that made this a much more readable book, and people have said that it's a readable book. So we got to round about 2004, 2005, didn't we? And we were both working together at the National Prescribing Centre. We'd had 15 years of evidence-based medicine, which can only tell you what might be a good thing to do for a population. It can't possibly tell you what the right thing to do for an individual was. And we got NICE established a few years earlier in 1999, and we'd got the command and control of the quality and outcomes framework for general practice in 2004. So what we were seeing at that time was variation everywhere. There was still, despite the availability of evidence and guidelines and that being reinforced through command and control, there was still variation everywhere. And we started to ask why that was. And that got us into the difference between making decisions for populations and making decisions for individuals. And of course, all of that evidence-based medicine guidelines, command and control approach was on the background, as you say, of a couple of centuries of fantastic scientific progress, wonderful science and technology. The golden era for the development of new medicines was after the Second World War until the end of the 20th century. Built on the lessons learned from the scaling of penicillin and its eventual mass manufacture at the end of the Second World War, and nobody's saying that science and technology isn't wonderful. We're all grateful for all of the stuff that we have available to us, much more than there was when I started my medical career, but instinctively we knew that this "let's treat everybody the same" was the wrong thing, and we spent basically 20 years trying to work out how we pull all this together into something that might make sense to people, so that we do the population stuff well, but we also do the individual stuff well.
It won't surprise you to know that I couldn't agree more, given that we have worked together for so long. And I think while we have argued about lots of things and disagreed about lots of things, we've also agreed about lots of things as well. Certainly, how you describe that, almost the frustration that I know you felt and I certainly felt when you were teaching people evidence-based medicine and therapeutics, and you'd go and deliver this fantastic workshop with fantastic educational content, and people would go and think, "Oh, great, I know how to manage people with type 2 diabetes now, and we've looked at the prescribing data and we know what to do," and then we'd look at it again in a year's time and nothing has changed, or very little had changed from just doing that sort of one-off intervention, running a therapeutic workshop for people. And it was that understanding of how humans make decisions, I think, that certainly that you brought to me with various books that you suggested that I read, and I think it was a journey that we both went on together, and we got a lot out of that professionally, but also I think, and people that I speak to about who attended NPC workshops back then will say it was one of the best things that we ever went to when you talked to us about cognitive psychology and how people make decisions. And I think the information mastery stuff that we both picked up from Dave Slawson and Alan Shaughnessy from America, which is how do you stay up to date efficiently? Because there's so much out there. How do you sort out the important stuff from the less important stuff? How can you feel comfortable about not knowing everything? And I think when we took those aspects together with the person-centered approach, so how do you explain the risks and benefits of treatments to patients, that's when we thought, actually, there is something more in this, not just that education of evidence-based medicine and getting implementation of evidence into practice, or indeed just following guidelines by rote. It needs to be more sophisticated than that, doesn't it? And that's what I think comes across beautifully in your book, about how you need to invest time in getting good at those sorts of things.
I think you're right, John. The cognitive psychology was a big thing. One of the first books I read was a book by an American author called Jerome Groopman, and that book was called How Doctors Think, and that opened all sorts of doors. I remember bringing into the office, and you said this book should be called Do Doctors Think, which was completely unfair and unreasonable, but really quite funny. and, and, and yes, that was a sliding doors moment, wasn't it? When we realised that people were, highly intelligent, hardworking, compassionate people, but they were dealing with something that was really a very complex cognitive task. Holding a consultation with a patient is one of the most complex, high level cognitive tasks that anybody can be asked to undertake. I think I'd say probably Neil Armstrong had a more difficult task landing on the moon, but that apart, this is really difficult. And so you can see, I hope listeners, or appreciate listeners, why it's taken me 10 years to put all of this together into a format that makes sense as you move from one chapter to the next chapter to the next chapter, so that it does make a story.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked, haven't we, about the difference between complexity and complicated stuff. So the health service or delivery of healthcare is a complex problem. Putting a person on the moon is a complicated problem. So the analogy with Neil Armstrong is a really good one, isn't it? Because it's a really, really complicated thing to do. But if you get all these systems and processes in place, and you calculate all the probabilities to 10 decimal places, and making sure that bad things aren't going to happen, you press the right buttons in the right order, you can put a person on the moon. If you were to write, and you could write a nice guideline, couldn't you, on how to put a person on the moon? If you followed it to the letter, you'd be able to put a person on the moon. So that's an example of a complicated problem. A complex problem would be something like bringing up a child. And this is an analogy that I know you've used over the years with that. If NICE were to write a guideline on how to bring up a child, and everyone followed it to the letter, everyone's children would still be different, because it requires hundreds of thousands of different human interactions on a daily basis to form the opinions and the values and preferences of that child. And healthcare is exactly the same, because it's about human-to-human interactions, not just following processes and policies.
And if you think of the way that the health system operates, at any given moment in time, there are different small teams or individuals doing different things that actually other people within the same organization might not realize what they're doing. So, there is a system involved in this, and the bit that you're always learning, aren't you? And systems thinking seems to me to be something that we've missed out on, in the same way that we missed out on cognitive psychology for all those years. And we might come back to systems thinking.
Okay, that would be good if we could, actually. So just in terms of your book then, what would you say were the key themes that you addressed within the book?
I think this difference between making decisions for populations and making decisions for individuals, it's at the heart, and you talk about this a lot on this podcast. So let's not lose that, but let's not spend a lot of time on that. We take that as a given. I think what I've tried to do is to illustrate that we need a change from this command and control to the delivery of healthcare. There's this quaff has led us in what actually I wrote 10 years ago, a slow unconscious professional slide into following algorithmic rules. So I go along for my flu. Let's tell stories. I go along for my flu vaccination to my GP practice last November, and I've just gone for the flu vaccination. I've thrown a scalding cup of coffee down my throat. I've driven at the legal speed limit, of course, across town. Failed to find a parking space in the practice car park, so I had to go and park somewhere else. I've run to the GP surgery to get there on time. The nurse sticks the needle in my arm painfully, and that's going to happen sometime, isn't it? It's a no blame thing. But then she wants to take my blood pressure whilst I'm standing up. After 30 seconds after she's stabbed me in the arm, why she want to do that? It's because we're doing this algorithmic approach to care. And of course I refuse, because this has happened to me 3 times in the last 30 years, where somebody's taken my blood pressure inappropriately and they've said I'm hypertensive, and it then takes me 6 months to extricate myself from that label and that diagnosis. So, there's a failure demand in some of this algorithmic care. This drive towards opportunistic health promotion is actually counterproductive. We spend a lot of time doing asthma reviews on people who are perfectly okay with their asthma. Thank you very much. But we do it because it's driven by the quaff and the guidelines and everything else. I mean, what difference does it make? How is somebody really going to change their approach to their care of their asthma in a 10-minute consultation? You might stimulate a few thoughts, but it's not going to be transformational in the same way that our workshops weren't transformational for the people who came along. You're just trying to nudge things a bit in the right sort of direction. So command and control is a thing. Data collection is another thing. Goodness gracious, the amount of stuff that gets recorded on computers these days. So another story, because we're into stories. I'm the carer for Auntie Mavis. Auntie Mavis is in the book. She's given permission for me to tell stories about her. Lovely Auntie Mavis, who married my Uncle Rafe in 1971. So Auntie Mavis is in a nursing home. She's 91 years old, and she falls over, really a bad fall. She shouldn't have been out of a chair, but she managed to extricate herself from a chair, crashes onto the floor. She's got cuts, she's got lacerations, she's shaken up, she's shocked, and she's almost certainly got a fracture of her wrist and maybe her hand as well. So we wait 6 hours for the ambulance to arrive. And then we arrive at the A&E department, and there's actually plenty of people in the A&E department, but instead of seeing the patients, they're clustered around what we used to call the nursing station, tapping away into their computers, recording, dotting every I, crossing every T about all the patients that are in the A&E department. But nobody is giving Auntie Mavis a drink, some food, even a bedpan, until I go and ask for it, because we're collecting all this data, and all this data is the saviour. So I think one of the big papers is Don Berwick's era 3 for medicine in JAMA in 2016, where he talks about essentially a Goldilocks approach to data collection. You need some data. You don't need too little data, because that's not enough to demonstrate competence and quality. But what we don't want is this overwhelming desire for enormous amounts of data.
I mean, I think again, Don Berwick's paper is a seminal paper. We'll put it in the show notes for people to read. It's really good. So, and I think it's an important point. Data collection is a good thing to do, but not if you forget about the fundamental, basic human decency things that you need to do as well, such as offering Mavis a glass of water, or making sure that she's not desperate for the toilet. A bit of kindness and a bit of empathy, not just the protocol. It's about thinking about practice in medicine, not just following it by rote. And there is a existential thing here as well, because computers know more than we do as human beings. This is something that comes out of the information mastery stuff, isn't it? Computers know more than we do, and have done for years, actually. And the phenomenal rate at which the knowledge of computers is growing is unprecedented. What computers don't do, though, yet, is think about applying it and taking into account people's feelings when applying things to the individual situation. And maybe there will be a time when they do that, but at the moment it still requires human beings looking at someone in the eye and stopping and thinking and going, she's 80, she's 90-year-old, this lady. Can I just check to make sure she's okay? I'll do the data stuff as well, but I'm also going to remember that she's a human being within this as well.
I mean, there's a systematic review of what patients prioritise in their healthcare, and humaneness is the number one priority, ahead of competence and technical accuracy. Now, that might change if there isn't technical competence delivered as part of the care package. Nobody is saying that you can get away with not knowing, that the heart has 4 chambers and it's controlled by this complex neurohormonal system and all the rest of it. You have to have that technical knowledge in order to be able to manage somebody with, say, heart failure. But you've also got to have a brilliant conversation with the patient with heart failure in order to determine what matters to them, what their ideas are, what their concerns are, what their expectations are. So this rebalancing between technical stuff and consultation skills is part of the book.
I was just going to say, you make that point in the book that it's not people don't make complaints or make errors usually because of a lack of technical competence or technical knowledge. Pharmacists, doctors, nurses, their technical knowledge is usually pretty sound. There are occasions when it's not, but by and large it's pretty good. The gaps, the educational gaps, are in that ability to communicate effectively and listen effectively and apply things to the individual. And that's what came across loud and clear in the book to me. That rebalance that's required between that the drive for educational standards where you know stuff about stuff, but you can't necessarily think about stuff and apply it to individuals in a wise way. That's the thing that really came out of the book to me.
So what we know about the development of expertise, another whole raft of research that is useful in this. We know people have to know the basics first. So I actually don't think there's too much wrong with undergraduate courses as they stand, being dominated by the science and the technology and the facts. It's that postgraduate training and lifelong learning where we still concentrate on facts and knowledge rather than concentrating on consultation skills and the development, as you say, Jonathan, of wisdom, which largely is the ability to shut up and listen to the patient, and then take into account, what they're saying to you, so you shape a shared decision together.
Okay, so I think we've heard about what the key themes of the book, and what you were trying to achieve in saying what you said within the book. And as you'd expect from a professor of evidence-based medicine, evidence-informed decision-making, it's well referenced, isn't it? There's lots in there if you want to go away and read the prime sources of this. I guess my question to you now, Neal, is around what we're going to do about this. What do you think the key challenges are for the future for healthcare and medicines?
Well, I think before we delve into that, I think it's important to acknowledge that there have been 2 pretty big things that have happened to healthcare over that period of time. One, I think, is the austerity and the fact that we no question, the NHS has been hollowed out. We're short of resources. Equally, we can't expect an endless exponential increase in the proportion of gross domestic product that's granted to any health system. That there has to be a limit to what we can afford to do. But no question, we're short, particularly of GPs. So the number of GPs since 1948 has doubled, but the number of consultants has gone up 12 times. So, and okay, lots of the developments have been highly technical stuff, and you can see where there might be a proportionality here that is open for debate. But Nevertheless, it does seem to me that falling GP numbers isn't a good thing when all the research says about what makes a health system work well is a well-functioning primary care. So accepting all of that, there are a few things to think about. I think lots of healthcare is low value healthcare. It's referenced in the book. At least 20% low value healthcare. People, towards, we're all going to die, and what most of us hope for is a compression of morbidity. We'd like to live. We'd like to live well. We'd like to remain fit for as long as possible, and then something's going to get us, and we'd like it to be short and sharp. We'd like a compression of morbidity. Whereas what we've been doing is expanding morbidity. Let's identify some risk factors for people, early in their life, and turn them into a patient, so that then they're put through this sausage machine of algorithmic care, of monitoring and appointments, and it all reduces capacity. In terms of preventative care, Wilson and Youngner said in the 1960s in their original screening paper, you can't do screening if the health system is overwhelmed with acute illness. And I do think that's where we are. I do think we've got to rethink some of the prevention stuff. Again, one for the show notes perhaps is Meaning Anson's paper on the NICE guideline on physical activity, brief advice for adults in primary care. So what Mina, Gordon Guyatt, one of the founding fathers of evidence-based medicine, and Victor Montori from the States, what they did was take the 143 recommendations in that guideline. Now, 143 recommendations. Can you quote me one? And there's more than 300 of these NICE guidelines to remember. But what the researchers did was calculate the percentage of the total GP time it would take to follow those guidelines for increasing physical activity. If you follow those 143 recommendations, it would be 15% of the entire GP time spent talking to people about exercising a bit more. So the capacity in the health service is finite, and we need to have a think about what we're doing here.
I mean, I completely agree with you there, and we've forgotten to major in on that. The fundamental question that should start any consultation, or not start, but certainly forms the nub of it, which is, what is it that matters to you as an individual here? And as you say, Neal, it's that, would you like your morbidity to be over 10 years, or would you like it to be a really, really good quality life and then a quick sort of, demise? Most people would go for the latter. So we're either not asking that question, or we're not really, really listening to the answer that's coming back, are we? When we're designing our health system,
most of what we're doing is not prevention. Prevention is reducing income inequality, supporting young people in their early years with education. It's about job control and taking away this external command and control and giving it. We're back to systems thinking again. Good cheap food, basic ingredients. Work-life balance, all that sort of stuff. So the Michael Marmot stuff is prevention, and we've sort of ignored all that and gone for shiny toys and scanners.
Yeah, quite right. I mean, one of my great hopes for the new government is that the Marmot review is looked at again and they really, really start thinking about doing something about it. Because I completely agree with you. The way we make a big difference to health inequalities is not by giving bright, shiny, new, innovative medicines to people. It's about giving people a decent start in life. And and that's not a part of a political view at the moment, but for whatever reason, it really isn't. I think that the paper on the NICE recommendations was an interesting one as well. I remember reading that. That's sort of that lost the amount of time that it requires people to do this. Of course, there was another paper, wasn't there, a couple of weeks ago, which was quite an interesting one that you and I had discussed, which was the Hussein Nassi paper in the Lancet, looking at the population impact of NICE approved technologies between 2000 and 2020. I still think I need to look at that paper in a bit more detail, but the bottom line was that NICE has been potentially responsible for the loss of 1.25 million QALYs, not a gain of 1.25 million QALYs for the population, but a loss. And the reason for that is, and this is what the paper suggests, is that because we've prioritised those medicines and technologies that give us a little bit of health gain but cost a lot of resources, we've then had to pay for that by deprioritising some of those other interventions that maybe cost a little bit less but aren't quite as glamorous or as easy to do, such as counselling for people with mental illness, such as prevention of disease, those sorts of things. So I think there's going to be a lot in that paper, Neil. I know you had thoughts about that as well.
Well, I mean, we haven't got time to go into this in great detail for the listeners, Jonathan. But NICE was established as described in the book. NICE was established to address the situation in 1999, and I know that NICE will say that they've changed and adapted over the years, but the essential approach remains the same as it was 25 years ago. And in essence, I mean, just at a very basic level, what happens is that a pharmaceutical company will develop a medicine, and the costs per QALY will be calculated, and NICE will usually say yes to a new technology that has a cost per QALY of 20 to 30,000. So the company will establish a price that delivers a cost per QALY of 20 to 30,000, which enables NICE to say yes. So in effect, it's maximising the price of new medicines, not the health system or society saying, well, this improvement is worth us paying X or Y for.
And I know we've been talking for years about value-based pricing and stuff, and no one has as yet found a solution to that from what I can see. I think you're right. I think there's lots in that paper, and we probably haven't got time to discuss it, but it's certainly worth listeners digging out the paper. I'll put it in the show notes. Have a read of it. It's something. It's certainly food for thought. I think it's certainly going to be food for thought for NICE and for the Department of Health in terms of priorities. Just to finish off, we've got about maybe a few minutes left, Neil. Just based on again on your book, what do you think the key challenges are for prescribers that you would give to them for the future? What are the things that pharmacy professionals or medicines teams or prescribers should be doing differently, perhaps, or thinking about?
Well, it's that Muir Gray thing, isn't it? That the future's present. It's just not universally being carried out everywhere. So, I would say focus on the big picture. I would hope that we're moving or have moved away from therapeutic switches to save 10p a prescription, which occupy loads of time. Yeah, that surely we're about now consultation skills, so that medication reviews are not just looking for contraindications and interactions and suboptimal or inappropriate doses. We're actually doing the proper thing, which is saying, what would a good day look like for you, and how are you getting on with all this stuff, and what about a drug holiday, as you were talking about with Lucy in the last podcast. And so I hope we're into consultation skills rather than technical switching. I think a real challenge, Jonathan, is continuity of care. I'm not sure how we square this. I think systems thinking helps us here, whereby we devolve responsibility for improving care down to local teams. And so, but continuity of care has an evidence base. It's an evidence base that's been largely been ignored. Improvements in premature mortality, where you get continuity of care from somebody in primary care, and so how we mix in the skills of nurses and pharmacists with those of doctors in an optimum way needs a bit of thinking about, I think. And that for me is the big challenge as we move forward to bright sunny uplands where austerity starts to move into the rear view mirror a bit. But the most important thing, I think, is that people look after themselves and look out for each other. I think the last few years, people have had really, really tough times. The pandemic, personal illness. The more I sit back and say to people, tell me a bit about what's going on. There's so many people leading this life of quiet desperation that I think. Again, it's let the local small team work together in the interests of themselves and then patient care, and that would be, I think, one of the biggest challenges, and not getting sucked into chasing artificial targets that somebody else has imposed. So some of that you can do as individuals, some of it you can do as teams. I accept that some of it requires a system change. And I think we're all hopeful of a system or an improvement in the system will facilitate it. Some of those changes towards a more individualised approach to patient care.
Fantastic. Thank you, Neal. My take home for listeners, and you're far too modest to say this, would be get the book and read the book. It's really, really good. I know I'm biased. I get one mention in the book. 25 years working with him, guys, and I get one mention in the book. Can you believe that? Anyway, I'm not going to hold that against him. What I will say is that two people who are much smarter than me, Richard Lehman and Alf Collins, wrote, well, Richard said, simply a magnificent achievement, grounded and readable throughout. And I can see Neal blushing here. And Alf Collins said, this is a masterpiece, should be required reading for policymakers who seem to want to ignore decades of research evidence. I'll reread it probably twice. So that's Professor Alf Collins, who is a good friend of both of ours, and for good reasons. He's a very, very smart man. Thank you, Neal. I will say to listeners, please have a look at Neal's book, have a read of it. Please let us know your thoughts on social media. Send us an email. If you've got any feedback on this. I want to thank Neal for being a guest on this. It's been great chatting with you again. I said it would be like Bob Mortimer and Paul Whitehouse without the comedy. It's probably about right. We've had a good old whinge, haven't we, mate? We really have. It's been great. Quite cathartic.
A slight regression into ranting at some stages, I suspect, but I feel all the better for that.
Exactly. So thanks very much for listening, guys. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with the 6th and final episode of Sensible Prescribing in Older People with Jonathan and Lucy. And we're going to meet Janet, who's an 86-year-old lady who has heart failure. She's just lost her husband recently and misses him terribly. We'll discuss the importance of getting to know your patients. And maybe we might even discuss the importance of getting to know their beloved dog or cat. And then in 4 weeks' time, I'm going to be chatting to Anna Murphy and Ravigot Sagu about the update to the asthma guidelines from NICE, BTS and SIGN. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. Cheers, guys. Bye.